Hello, I'm Brad Kelly, and you're listening to Method and Madness. This is a show about books, the people who write them, and the labyrinth to be explored between the words.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his band. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had.
The Crossing, published in 1994, was Cormac McCarthy's seventh novel and the second installment in what is called the Border Trilogy. This volume, which can be read independently of Part 1, All the Pretty Horses, is a sort of Bildungsroman and picaresque about 16-year-old Billy Parham, the son of ranchers in New Mexico in the 1940s. Wolves have been extirpated from the area, but a she-wolf comes up from Mexico and begins to predate the stock. When Billy happens to trap her, a task that very nearly exceeds his grasp, he finds himself charged with a sacred duty to return her home to the mountains in the south. A not unquixotic mission that begins a life of quests to that terra damnata, at once adventurous, mystical, doomed, and inevitable. There are ultimately 3 trips south of the border, and I'm going to ask at some point, why is it not called The Crossings? It's called The Crossing, even though there's 3 crossings. The first crossing is to return the wolf. The second is to find his father's horses after his parents were murdered by thieves. And the third is to find his younger brother who'd gone missing down there on his own ill-advised journey. This is a Western that finds no real villain vanquished and only a smattering of gunfights. It's a coming-of-age tale that ends kind of unresolved in an action-adventure fable in which the moral is no clearer than an old bloodstain. To discuss this book, I've got one of the best writers in the game at the moment. Andrew Edwards is the author of King of Dogs and most recently Crowbar. A few weeks ago, he was kind enough to join me for a Melee conversation, so definitely check that out. And buy Crowbar and King of Dogs. These are both incredible books, highest possible recommendation, not just from me, but a lot of other people are starting to get the hint. If you are into The Crossing, you'll love King of Dogs, and if you generally dig the books I choose here for main episodes, you're going to absolutely love Crowbar. So, Andrew, thanks for joining me once again. This is you're actually the third time on this show. This is the first time anybody's been on 3 times, so you can add that to your trophy case.
Wow, yeah, I'll put it at the top of the list. Yeah. I'm glad to be here. Thanks
there again. You go. Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we get into this, if you're listening to this and you enjoy this conversation, in a couple of weeks I'm going to be dropping part 2, the Madness episode. And for people who aren't familiar with that, that's a paywall part of the show where I kind of go on it's a sort of controlled burn through many of the topics that kind of come up to me about this book. It's a full-on audio presentation with embedded audio clips and that sort of thing. In this case, I'll be going deep into wolf lore and the singular relationship between wolf and man through history, how wolves came to be raised by men, and the fascinating story of one man who was raised by wolves, at least partially anyway. I'm also going to be going into the archetype of the cowboy and see if I can figure out what Carl Gustav Jung would have to say about Billy Parham's tale. Plus, I'm going to do a little bit of comparative literature thing, tracing the influence of The Crossing, not to Melville or Faulkner, though those are definitely in there, but to a work of what we would now actually call young adult fiction. There's actually, I think, a way of reading The Crossing, and this might be interesting to people, that it's very, very much influenced by a famous novel in the 1930s that now is most commonly read by middle schoolers and high schoolers. So anyway, as we get into, now that's all in the madness portion. If you want to check that out, subscribe at either Substack or Patreon, madmethodpod.com/subscribe, $5 a month. You get access to those episodes, and you also get early access to everything I do on the show, including this conversation we're having right here. So now on The Crossing, Andrew, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on for this conversation, I'm a big Cormac McCarthy fan, definitely influenced by him, maybe the only author who I've read basically everything they've written. And he's one of these writers who, for people like me and like you, people have their sort of ranked lists of McCarthy's work, right? And it's almost like, it's funny when you kind of see this flare up on the internet. It's almost like a personality test. It's almost like a Myers-Briggs thing, right? Like, what is your Cormac McCarthy tiered list? And you're one of the few people I know who puts The Crossing pretty near to the top of that list. So
Yep.
I guess the one thing I kind of where I wanted to start, I guess, is what, in the broadest terms, and we'll get down into specifics, what makes The Crossing so great to you? What puts it near the top of the list of McCarthy's work?
Yeah. So in the broadest terms, the best way I've thought recently to why is this? I was pondering this exact question. Somebody online said, it feels like, I guess this person agreed with me, and they said, it feels like McCarthy, with all cylinders firing, kind of in the most, because the guy literally has, immense talents. People kind of don't give him as much credit for his plotting and structure. Where's the plot? Well, I don't know what to tell you if you can't see it. Maybe that was the point, that you can't see it. Right. But I think that's why The Crossing, to me, there's personal reasons, of course. And again, the emotional element, that's one of those cylinders, right? We want to read a novel where it's not merely technique. There's something beyond our capacity, our normal capacities to feel or express something. And for me, this book in particular has that, but a few others as well. I think it's this balance where he's hitting, you mentioned, I don't know quite how to pronounce this, the Bildungsroman, he's hitting this just out of the park. He's hitting the dialogue, the arc, the myth, beat to beat, the style, the craft, everything is just on fire. And then the philosophy what has anyone figured out what's really going on in Blood Meridian yet? I don't think so. But that element is absolutely aflame for me in this book.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I agree with all of that. This is the second time I've delved into this book. I read it, back when I was kind of reading my way through his entire shelf. And there is, the philosophical element seems the most almost deliberate and overt in this one. We seem to have, and we'll get in more into this, but we seem to have these most passages of characters saying something very wise and interesting and perspective shifting in a way that shows up in other places in McCarthy's work for sure, but it seems to be much more at the fore in this book. And it also seems to thereby have it has the most sort of paragraphs that you could excerpt and put by themselves, and people would kind of read them and nod their head, right? Not just for their poetic beauty, but for that's an insight. That's something I can kind of savor and think about and sink my teeth into. It seems to do that even more than any of the rest of McCarthy's work, to me. And I agree with you too. The style is on all cylinders. This is also going to lead into something I also want to talk about, but to me, there's almost like a high style McCarthy, and then the later work is more stripped down, right? We get into No Country for Old Men and The Road, and I love those books dearly, but they are much less ornate. They are much stripped down, and this is like the high watermark for I don't know what we call it, the Baroque McCarthy. This is as good as it gets in my opinion. And I don't know, the ranked list stuff is a little tired in some ways to me, but Blood Meridian is incredible, obviously. But it seems there are a handful of things that I think McCarthy's doing even better in this book than in Blood Meridian. So I was glad to read it again. I think somehow it didn't. It's almost like this book, and tell me what you think about this. It almost feels like this book is like hidden in his overall work, because it's the second part of the Border trilogy somehow, and it feels like you can kind of skip it in some way.
Yeah, it does feel like that. I don't, when people, okay, so I don't want to take the Sutri branch in this conversation, because it deserves its own episode. I would imagine. But
Yeah.
I hear that brought up maybe as second to, and when I hear these people say the rankings, I don't really even know what they're. I mean, I have a general idea of what, like they're bowled over by its size and its rambling,
Mhm.
the many little pieces that it hits, I guess, in terms of what a novel could be. But to me, yeah, The Crossing, it may be in part that it's in the second slot in the Border trilogy, so maybe they feel like they have to, which of course you mentioned in your intro, it stands alone all day long,
Mhm.
and that again is
Mhm.
to me is kind of another piece of its brilliance. When I back away from The Crossing, and then sorry about the dog. Um,
It's all right.
when I back away, I realize like this enormous treasure sits within a larger treasure, and it's at that point where I kind of I have to do a thing which isn't fair and it doesn't fit in top 100 lists or what have you, but I have to say the Border trilogy itself is kind of a unity. It's like a single work, right? And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, well it's not even close to me at that point as far as what if I have to take, some people frame it in the desert island idea. I can only take so many books
Right.
with me. Well, okay, well I'll just take the Border trilogy and that's good. If I can I do that? Like, is that just one
Yeah.
book? Yeah.
Right.
But you're right, it
Right.
does seem kind of
Right.
hidden as if people haven't yet passed through all the pretty horses and then really taken on again, to me it's just damn near perfect. The Crossing.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And on that note of, I had this moment where, I was in as I'm reading it, I'm coming to these points where I notice myself thinking, oh, he's kind of going too far into this philosophical stuff, or he's reaching too far into his high flown language or whatever. And then I realized, no, I'm actually like assessing what a negative, like how to put this. I'm presuming what the criticisms would be of this. If I actually just pay attention to my reading experience, I'm enjoying the hell out of it the whole time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it kind of it's interesting that way. I do want to talk. I do want to spend some time talking about the style because, I think the style, and we're talking about The Crossing, we've kind of noted that, this is the high Cormac McCarthy style. This is when you see people parodying Cormac McCarthy's style, which can be done. We're seeing they're parodying what he kind of is doing in The Crossing and other books and All the Pretty Horses and Blood Meridian and Suttree. But this is a rich example of how he's doing it. I love this style. I could have seen him write like this up till the end. It would have been fascinating to me to see what he did. Doomed enterprises divide lives forever into the then and the now. He'd carried the wolf up into the mountains in the bow of the saddle and buried her in a high pass under a cairn of scree. The little wolves in her belly felt the cold draw all about them, and they cried out mutely in the dark, and he buried them all and piled the rocks over them and led the horse away. He wandered on into the mountains. He whittled a bow from a holly limb, made arrows from cane. He thought to become again the child he never was. They rode the high country for weeks, and they grew thin and gaunted, man and the horse grazed on the sparse winter grass in the mountains and gnawed the lichen from the rock, and the boy shot trout with his arrows where they stood above their shadows on the cold stone floors of the pools, and he ate them and ate green nopal, and then on a windy day traversing a high saddle in the mountains, a hawk passed before the sun, and its shadow ran so quick in the grass before them that it caused the horse to shy, and the boy looked up where the bird turned high above them, and he took the bow from his shoulder and knocked and loosed an arrow and watched it rise with the wind rattling the fletching slotted into the cane, and watched it turning and arcing and the hawk wheeling and then flaring suddenly with the arrow locked in its pale breast. The hawk turned and skated off down the wind and vanished beyond the cape of the mountain. A single feather fell. He rode out to look for it, but he never found it. Found a single drop of blood that had dried on the rocks and darkened in the wind, and nothing more. He dismounted and sat on the ground beside the horse where the wind blew, and he made a cut in the heel of his hand with his knife and watched the slow blood dropping on the stone. 2 days later, he sat the horse on a promontory overlooking the Bavispe River, and the river was running backwards. That or the sun was setting in the east behind him. He made his rough camp in a windbreak of juniper and waited out the night to see what the sun would do or what the river, and in the morning when day broke over the distant mountains and across the broad plain before him, he realized that he had crossed back through the mountains to where the river ran north again, along the eastern side of the Sierras. Are you familiar with this book, Pen of Iron by Robert Alter? Have you heard of that?
No.
Yeah.
Tell me about
it. So Pen of Iron, yeah, so it's this book that's, the subtitle is American Prose in the King James Bible. And basically what he does is he goes and, we're all pretty familiar with this idea that the King James Bible sort of informs the American literary style or the American prose style. But he goes into like specifics, sometimes comparing paragraph to paragraph, what the actual DNA of this combination is. And there's one thing that I think we're all sort of familiar with is, and it's called, there's a term for this, polysyndeton, which is this repeated use of and to conjoin things. Polysyndeton, okay. I think, just means a chaining together of a bunch of stuff. And so we know there's these passages where he's sort of, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, just long, long, complicated sentences. But I was really fascinated. So on the face of it, like, that's not necessarily good style. It has a sort of hypnotic quality to it. But in reading this Pen of Iron, I came across this really interesting thing. So he talks about, Robert Alter does, he brings in the example of Abraham Lincoln's speech where he says 70, is it what is it? Fourscore and, oh my God, I should know this. I feel like I should get kicked out of the country. When Abraham Lincoln says fourscore and
some
7?
amount of years,
is that
whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, yeah, 7. As soon as I started saying it, it's like that didn't seem right. Now, Robert Alter kind of points to this as a leveraging of the King James style, and basically what he says is that what Abraham Lincoln did in that moment, and I think Cormac McCarthy does this as well, is his word choice actually slows down your processing of this very specific thing, right? He doesn't just say the number of years; he says the fourscore ends, and that grants a certain gravity to that space of time just by stretching it out and slowing it down. And I think that's one thing that Cormac McCarthy does as well, right? Is like these gestures and these movements, there's a implied gravity and solemnity to them just because he's taking his time with them. And he'll speed things up too. And then, you'll have a week pass in a paragraph and then 7 pages to describe taking care of the horse, right? And then this brought to mind, I'm going to ramble here for a minute because I have a few things on this. This brought to mind, I don't know if you're familiar with this concept. I don't know how well you know. Do you know the films of Andrei Tarkovsky very well?
I wouldn't call myself
like
an expert,
Solaris and,
but I do have an opinion, and I've kind of been into it of late, actually. So,
right on, yeah. So Andrei Tarkovsky, if you read his, I can't remember the name of his book. He wrote a book on filmmaking, and he has this concept of time pressure that he talks about, and time pressure is basically just like, how do you manipulate things to make the viewer or the audience intensely aware of time's passage and build atmosphere, et cetera, and leverage time as a storytelling element, like time in and of itself. And Tarkovsky would accomplish this with long unedited shots, right? He would also manipulate it by basically choosing varied focal lengths depending on how he wanted sort of time to quote unquote feel. And I really think this is something Cormac McCarthy does as well. It's sort of like we're going to that chained ands, the and. I think what that is equivalent in film to an unedited shot, the length of a shot, right? The sentence doesn't like. Yeah. I'll give you an example. I read a couple passages. I said I was going to edit in. I read a couple ahead of time, and then I thought whatever we come across, I'll read a couple more, or just record them and put them in. And there's a few paragraphs that I picked where I read it, and I'm trying to do read the full sentence on one breath, and I can't do it. I run out of breath before the end of the sentence, right? Because he's constantly chaining these things together, and I think it's fascinating, like how he has to be. It made me realize, thinking about this, the Robert Alter Pen of Iron stuff, this 70 years ago stuff. Cormac McCarthy has to be doing all of this very, very, very deliberately. Like, I don't think you accidentally accomplish this effect. I think this is a very careful thing. And I think there's another, and then I want to throw it to you and get some of your thoughts on style and like what appeals to you about it and that sort of thing. There's another thing I realized in reading this, and I kind of confirmed this reading some of the academic stuff, is that I think Cormac McCarthy has a strong preference for Anglo-Saxon versus Latin words, which I find that I do as well. And I actually went through and I looked at a couple paragraphs of his and was like, some of the words I know are Anglo-Saxon, some I know are Latin, but for the most part, I can't spot those off the top of my head. And yeah, he's probably running at like 75 to 80% Anglo-Saxon words versus Latin. And so what you get in a great Cormac McCarthy passage often is you'll get this polysyndenton thing. And I stole that term from Aaron Gwynn, by the way. Not that he made it up, but he's how I learned about that term. So you get this chained, you get the many chained words. You get the Anglo-Saxon, the heavy Anglo-Saxon effect, and you get the time pressure element that I'm talking about. This idea of like we're going to stretch stuff out when we need to make it sort of give it this manipulated sense of gravity and solemnity and heaviness, being very carefully chosen by Cormac McCarthy. And then there's also this thing with all those things working together. You'll often find, if you try and diagram this out, Cormac McCarthy frequently almost hits iambic pentameter. It's very rarely actually clean iambic pentameter, but you'll get like a sequence of 5 or 6 syllables that are in pentameter, and then he'll switch it up on you. I don't know. I think these are some of the subtle things that are at work that you kind of don't really even think about. And in fact, if you think about them too much, it'll ruin the reading experience. But as a writer, if I'm thinking about how do I write like Cormac McCarthy, I think these are things you might want to consider. And a bunch of other stuff. That was a whole spiel I had about the styles, just kind of stuff I was learning and thinking about, trying to answer this question to me. What makes the Cormac McCarthy style? What do you like? What appeals to you about it?
So when you were talking, I was thinking about the cinematography concept. I think that you must have hit the mark on this. And that was one thought. The second thought was, thanks to Aaron Gwynn I remember seeing that term in an article, polysyndention, whatever it was. And something like that, and it just passing right by like, oh, it's a thing. Because you can't read, again, I think you're right too, where this is the book that if people are going to criticize the style, I've heard versions where people say, and I think you and I might have talked about this, where why is it so fascinating to just watch somebody eat beans and tortillas? And I think that it is related to the craft techniques that he's using there. I saw someone pull a line one time and just sort of like absolutely dismiss it. It was something like, he made beans, he walked to the fire, he picked up the billet, lit a cigarette, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, okay, I get it. Like, you want this luxurious thing. You want this, you're demanding of the writer to conform to some sort of, and it seems to me I'm trying to get over to this idea of something about the decadence of the language versus, because another thing you hear is it's very sparse. And of course he does go sparse in these later books that you mentioned toward the end of his career. Brilliantly done. You know, I love those books, maybe not quite as much or just in a different way. But these things, as if what the camera is focused on and then how the writer is choosing to sort of walk our eyes through or present the picture to us in text. I agree here again that he's absolutely aware of what he's doing. And the only other thought that I may add here before I try and get over to this, there's something about maybe I don't know what Anglo-Saxon versus Latin. I mean, I probably intuit it because it's mostly, I would say, you know, musicians will say, well, I learned by ear. I probably learned to write by ear. And that brings me to this, there's a rhythmic quality. And I have noticed that he seems to have an incredible ear or command for how far to push that rhythm to the exact period. You know, he doesn't use commas, of course, but right. The and or whatever, he knows right when to yank it back. And I think that is there anybody else that you can think of that I'm sure there are equivalents in terms of their control and their mastery of that particular kind of innovation maybe that they've brought to the table. But I can't hardly think of anybody that I've ever read who can get right up to the edge of, and this is that Harold Bloom comment. He made this comment one time, and you know, I don't have opinions about Harold Bloom. I never really exposed myself to his ideas, but I did read what he said about Cormac McCarthy, and he called him something like a ham. And he was sort of suggesting that McCarthy was almost knew that he was like a caricature of himself or something, this super highfalutin thing, and he was and so McCarthy himself is sort of making fun of it. And I thought that was wrong. That's too far. That's where the critic, I think, has read in. And I think it goes back to this idea of McCarthy knows exactly what he's doing and exactly how to dial that with exquisite control and calibration. And so where people will see this this excess, I think, taken all of its parts are taken as a whole, and we go back to this, he just ate beans, he just lit the cigarette. Everything does come out balanced, for me personally. And I don't know that I think you're right that you wouldn't, I find myself sort of trying to study it as I'm reading it, and then I think I stopped. I've read this book probably 9-10 times. Yeah. And at this point I don't even try. Yeah. And I'm more concerned about trying to visualize the whole, or just take it on as a whole, and whatever sinks in this time is fine. But I'm not sure that any of this is going to be too useful to anybody other than to say, the last bit here that jumps out in terms of his style is this timelessness that you mentioned there. And that seems to me to be where, in my mind, as I'm trying to unravel this or look at it, because I'll be honest, when I first read this book, I set it down and I just said, I don't know how this was possible. Like, I was floored, you know. Whereas All the Pretty Horses, I digested pretty well, and Blood Meridian later. But I just stood in awe of his prose, and I still am. But to me, that timeless element is somehow managed against this expectation of something being luxurious and kind of also, I'm going to say meaningless because I can't think of a better word.
Right.
And I have a few authors, and since these authors aren't going to listen to this podcast, I'll say it, but like Zadie Smith, like great writer. She's, fine. David Foster Wallace maybe falls in this category a little bit where I feel like you could almost make fun of them more for this odd, excessive type of language than you could ever even begin to really apply this accusation to McCarthy. And it's a luxurious, decadent saturation thing that when you step back, at first glance, that may be what you want to gloss it as, but it is this high flown thing that's going deep, deep, deep into some sort of ancient rhythmic pattern to derive its impact and control. That's about all I can say.
I love all that. And I think there is something there. And the one thing I wanted to kind of key in on, you saying McCarthy knows exactly how far he can sort of push the rhythm and the musicality of it, right? He sort of knows exactly when to put that period in. And the one thing that I kind of noticed is, as I'm thinking about it and thinking about sort of that critical eye on this stuff, the voice that, might read this stuff and say, it's kind of too much. I kind of realized that I think a lot of times where that voice comes from is Cormac McCarthy's stylistically in The Crossing. He's sort of doing this high wire act, as far as I can tell, that has to be, it's so demanding of itself that every syllable kind of has to work. And I think there are maybe, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 times in the book where his foot slips off the high wire. He doesn't fall completely, but he has a slight misstep. He pushes it 2 syllables too far. He puts one too many wrinkles on the metaphor or something. It happens occasionally. And I think those moments are interesting from somebody who wants to study the style of this and think about what elements they might want to steal. Those moments are interesting because I think they kind of reveal how carefully constructed the style is, right? You get to see there's a slight seam there where like, and that actually noting those instead of criticizing them, just noting them helped me understand how delicate the thing he actually constructed is. How like, it's all like, I think about those, what is the name of that? Tensegrity, when people do these like pieces of furniture that are like chains and stuff that are like holding themselves in tension, and they look like they're defying physics. There's an element of Cormac McCarthy's style in this book that's like that, and it's interesting to see those handful of moments where he doesn't quite manage it. And far be it from me to criticize. It's like he's, it's the greatest batter in the world doesn't hit every single ball thrown at them. You're going to make these overreaches from time to time, for sure. Now, though, before we totally move out of the style thing, I did want to kind of pick up on the cinema thing for a moment, because one of the most notable things about, I think, Cormac McCarthy's style, and this is something that survives at least up until Stella Maris, is his writing in what you might call third-person dramatic. And this is the style in which you basically don't have any interiority. And this, there's no he thought. There's no everything is happening out in the physical world for the most part, which is really counter to the general thrust of, honestly, of like American fiction that I'm aware of anyway, within Cormac McCarthy's lifestyle, within his lifetime. A lot of the trend has been to go inside. And I don't necessarily think that tendency to go inside is wrong. Like, I think that's valid, but it's interesting to see. I think Cormac McCarthy's, I guess my point is, I think what's Cormac McCarthy's radicalism comes in is his refusal to go inside the characters' heads. And I think it's, I think it's fascinating to pay attention to that. And again, when you can notice when he stops doing it, when he does go interior for a second, they're actually these fantastic moments, and they're so powerful. Like there's one moment, and I'll include this in the in-bed. There's a moment where Billy Parham sort of dreams or tries to imagine the wolf after it's been killed, and it's beautiful.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
But that's one of the few times you ever get Billy Parham sort of talking in his own head, right? Or doing something in his own head. Otherwise, everything's happening out here. And the relationship to cinema, I think, here is, I think a lot of writers unconsciously or subconsciously have responded to the phenomena of film much like how a real short and partially accurate history of visual art in the 20th century is something like photography came to the forefront, so people stopped trying to paint realistically, and then abstract expressionism came about, right? So it's like, it's not exactly right, but it's kind of right. I think something similar happened with cinema and literature, where it was like, okay, cinema came around, cinema is quote unquote better at telling a story about objects moving around in space. So what we need to do is do the thing that film can't do, which is go inside the characters' heads. And McCarthy sort of says, no, screw that. We're still going to show space. We're still going to show things moving around in space. And he somehow manages to like find a new language for that, which I'm eternally fascinated by. I was curious, because I know your work well enough to have a sense of this, but I was curious how you think about this, if you think about it deliberately. Like, how do you think about writing internally to the character's head versus externally? Do you try to avoid internal completely?
Yeah, I've thought a great deal about this exact thing, and I 100% have. I don't know, maybe we're just birds of a feather, but I think that the issue with cinema, and then there's the other issue, and someone else is going to have to do the thinking on this one. Like, what about the radio? And this just like no visual, no text, but just the audio, but yet it's recorded and it's accessible kind of whenever I want. I can just, that's not oral tradition. That's not sitting around the fire with other people. That's, sitting in your room by yourself, hitting this other, and the thoughts that I've had, it basically relate to the triad where, as you, Brad, are writing. Tell me if this is kind of like your experience. There's your eyes seeing, your computer, your paper, what have you. There's some sort of, stream or a connection, or it can change like how it feels. To me, I go back to this idea of the daimon, the daemon. Like something is sort of, I'm almost waiting for that. Like my body, or what we might think of myself, has kind of been hollowed out in some sense. It isn't in, here's where I don't know. Some people with maybe more fear about this process, let's say, may not understand that it isn't as if I'm gone into a trance. People say, oh, I'm in the zone or whatever. I've never been put in a trance, I don't think, but it's something, it's a change of, brain state or what have you. So you're doing this, then you have this almost, it's not an interruption, but you have the fact that you're ultimately kind of communicating to what would be like a third party. But all of these distinctions, in some sense, are kind of debatable, Am I writing for myself? Can anybody read this? Is that even possible? Or is what I'm doing really more like what David Mamet says? I'm providing a service of delight, or just a kind of object that you're going to relate to in some way. Whereas other people would do this thing of, And I think maybe it's a little bit closer personally. There's a telepathic union that's happening between the reader and the author, who is not in this moment in time, but at a different point in time, was not only in time, was giving all of this Heideggerian sorge, like his utmost care. And it's times like, you mentioned this, not to get too far off track here at all, but where his foot slips, that he's doing the high wire, the tensegrity is a perfect word for it. And then his foot slips. I'm always, to me, that's like my brother or my dad or something. I'm like, oh, I have no, it does reveal something that, maybe that's like the fifth wall or something where,
right.
Because it's more dimensions than just, I have the text, I have the audio, I have the outside and the inside. And here's why. I'm kind of leading up to this, I think. Maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not. In the end, the best reader, let's say, all of these things are true. You know that at a certain point, a guy sat down to write this. And now I'm sitting here reading it. But the mystery behind why we're doing this and what it all ultimately means is not, remedied. And that, I think if we take McCarthy's philosophy, which seems to state something pretty close to that, like there are all of these unknowns. I can take any postulate, any axiom, and I can invert it, which he does so often. These conversations in The Crossing are comprised of if A, then B, but then negated by C. So what do we do? And there's this constantly referring to this void. And here I think is that compassion between the reader and also so obviously coming from the writer that he's not jiving you, Brad. And that's why I think men such as yourself and, millions of dudes pick up this book and are like, damn, hell yeah. And I think that part of it is because he's respecting something basic and maybe it is a little bit ineffable about our ultimate connection. And he's just using the processes of communication available to us. So to go deep interior is almost kind of like, this is bullshit. This isn't what this, it's
right.
It's almost in that. So that's where I'm going to stop talking because that's the best I can do.
I love that. I love that. You're hitting a lot of those same notes that I kind of think about this thing.
Cool.
It's weird that there's almost a paradox that in here of the more interior on its face, it would seem that staying exterior and moving parts around the board, physical parts around the board, would be more contrived. But actually, I think the reader experience is the more internal you go, the more contrived it feels. There's something about, we're just talking about objects. And then occasionally, when we need to, we're going to divert a little bit into sort of, some suggestion about maybe what it means or its relationship to other elements in time. But mostly we're just going to talk about moving these things around. And that feels indelible. That feels like timeless, like irrefutable. And then you start going into another writer would, myself included, will then like go into the character's head to try and like justify how they feel about stuff. And it starts to feel on some level false. It's very, very interesting. You brought up, and this is kind of the next direction I want to go. I mean, one of the things that strings this book together, and the more that I think about it, the more, I mean, I mentioned early on that this book is in a way a picaresque, and, in terms of this book, all that means is it's sort of made up of these episodes that aren't strictly causal. It's not that necessarily his, his interaction with one of the first conversations he has with people in Mexico is this older woman, and I think it's her granddaughter or her daughter, after the wolf scares off the donkeys. It's not like that's a fascinating conversation, but it's not like that conversation somehow leads into what happens next to Billy. It's just something that happens, and then we move on. As we pick up these little episodes, we start to realize that there is this sort of undulating thematic thread to them, that there is linkages to it, and that Billy Parham is sort of learning. I don't know if he's even learning. He's being given context for his experiences as he goes. And there's a whole bunch of these. I mean, I listed just one point out of curiosity. I was just like, how many of these like episodes where somebody is trying to tell Billy something do we have? And there's a ton of them. I mean, before he even gets to Mexico, we have that character, Don Arnulfo, who is he's the sort of bedridden guy who has some knowledge about the wolves. And this is where we get the big wolf download to start with, that, you know, the wolf is an unknowable thing. And he says things like, there's a great, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. There's a great bit where he says something about, to find out the truth of this, you must go where man's intentions and God's intentions are the same, or something like that. It's, I don't even know exactly what that means, but it gives me goosebumps. And he has a whole bunch of these. So, you know, the Don Arnulfo, and then he, like I said, the smoking woman beside the burrows. And then eventually we get the former Mormon, or the ex-priest who's alone among the ruins, who describes himself as the caretaker. And I want to talk about that part a little bit in depth, but just let me continue a little bit on this. Then he also talks to the horse broker, Gillian. There's the opera singer, or the diva, when she's sort of parked beside the road after the mule killing. She gives him this sort of download. There's the blind man who's had his eyes sucked out during in one of the craziest backstories I've ever read. There's the girl that Boyd saves. There's it might not be her. The girl tells us a story about her grandmother that kind of has this, even though it's secondhand. There's the palm reader that very late in the book that Billy interacts with, when he's the only time we see him really get drunk, when he wakes up in the horse stall. There's the woman who reads his palm. There's Quijada, the guy who is one of the sort of, he works for the Hearst. He works for the Hearst estate, and he helps the boys get their horse back at first. And then Billy Parham meets him again, like on his next trip to Mexico, and learns about the fate of his brother. And then there's the gypsies who are toting the air. Like, these episodes keep going on and on and on and on. And there's one thing I kind of realized about this is, first of all, McCarthy, like all writers, has his tendencies, this is something I'm going to include, right? And these kind of, I refer to these interactions in my notes as guru/shaman. It's somebody you go to, or maybe hermit would be the better word. It's somebody you go to who has some piece of wisdom that it's given to the main character, and they can't even necessarily deal with it. They don't even really understand what it is, but it sort of colors what happens later. And if you look in McCarthy's work, these are all over the place. They show up in Blood Meridian. They show up in, there's even one or two in The Road. They're kind of everywhere. And I love them, but I do see how somebody could be like, hey, this is in The Crossing. It does seem to be a sort of a string of these in a way. I did want to spend some time on one of them that I think is sort of the most interesting, and I know you do as well. And this is sort of backing up to the former Mormon who's alone taking care of this church. I think in the town of, I can't remember if he's still in the town. It's an unpronounceable name. But anyway, somewhere in Billy's wanderings, he runs into this guy, this guy who's a former Mormon and an ex-priest, just like the ex-priest in Blood Meridian. And this guy, perhaps more than any of these other guru hermit characters, almost seems to be waiting for Billy Parham to show up, or at least waiting for somebody like Billy Parham to show up. He seems to have this carefully constructed story that we're going to just assume is more or less true in the context of the story. He seems to have it waiting and ready to impart to whoever will listen to it. And there's the great moment, it's very, very subtle. this guy has cats around, and there's this great moment where Billy notices that the cat is sort of paying attention to him, but he can tell by how the cat acts that this guy must do this all the time by himself. And I just love that this guy's just like, he's in there sort of pontificating and prophesying and sort of figuring this out all the time. And so when Billy Parham shows up, he can give him this, what is honestly a incredibly complicated philosophical fable, and sort of foists it upon Billy. Tell me a little bit about your take, what this sort of one particular scene, its impact on you and how you think about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that cat part, because it, in some way, maybe goes back to the interior exterior thing where, but it also brings up the whole theme. And here again, where I'm looking at a tapestry and I'm like, how did he do this? How does this, and maybe there's a seam here, maybe there, maybe those are intentional. I don't even know. But in that moment, right. I think I agree with this read where the implication seems to be that this guy has, within the context of the narrative, he's waiting. He's and sure, in the construct of the novel, we could say like, well, yeah, he is waiting. The author has inserted him here for some purpose. Is that purpose just to pontificate about some stuff that Cormac was sitting around in wherever, El Paso for 10 years pondering, and now he wants to dump it on us? Well, is that how you read it?
Right.
Because Brad didn't read it that way. Neither did I. I'm sitting there going,
yeah.
How did I just go from, okay, the Latigo and the Sugan and the rifle goes in the scabbard, and then there's what? This mind-blowing thing that, I mean, he doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, for McCarthy again. I've learned more about philosophy from reading McCarthy than I've probably read from any 10 or 20 philosophy books. And he is an absolute genius in this way of putting these ideas or seemingly esoteric whatever, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Kant, whoever, and then it's not as if he's just transposing them to a story. He's almost giving us like a retrospective or maybe McCarthy's own sort of work through this philosophical material. So that I just wanted to make that comment. I agree that this moment, for whatever reason, which probably is not a mistake that it comes at, I think the beginning, it almost feels like it's a blurring of the edge between chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's like it just sucks you through this portal.
Yes.
So here's my take. Let me think about this a little bit about how exactly I want to.
Sure.
You may need to edit this part because I want to get it.
That's all right.
Get it right.
It's big.
It is.
That's part of the challenge of it. Yeah.
So here's the suggestion, and then maybe I can backfill it a little bit. I think that at a certain point, McCarthy, with respect to this exact bit about interior versus exterior versus what is the point of all this? Am I just talking to myself? What's the point of the novel even? At some point, I think he jettisoned all of that and moved into some type of a mental, and I'm just going to say magical space. And I think that the key, okay, it's the why do you believe that, Andy? Well, if we go back into that exact passage, there's a moment, I should have it pulled up, but I don't. The priest seems to imply, because he weaves through his whole, what is it? I mean, there's many, many pages. The peak of that argument to me is where the priest brings his listener forward and then says something like, and here we confront madness.
Acts have their being in the witness, Without him, who can speak of it? In the end, one could even say that the act is nothing, the witness all. It may be that the old man saw certain contradictions in his position. If men were the drones he imagined them to be, then had he not rather been appointed to take up his brief by the very being against whom it was directed? As has been the case with many a philosopher, that which at first seemed an insurmountable objection to his theories came gradually to be seen as a necessary component to them, and finally the centerpiece itself. He saw the world pass into nothing in the very multiplicity of its instancing. Only the witness stood firm, and the witness to that witness. For what is deeply true is true also in men's hearts, and it can therefore never be mistold through all and any tellings. This, then, was his thought. If the world was a tale, who but the witness could give it life? Where else could it have its being? This was the view of things that began to speak to him, and he began to see in God a terrible tragedy, that the existence of the deity lay imperiled for want of this simple thing, that for God there could be no witness, nothing against which he terminated, nothing by way of which his being could be announced to him, nothing to stand apart from and to say, I am this and that is other, where that is, I am not. He could create everything save that which would say him no. Now we may speak of madness. Now it is safe to do so. Perhaps one could say that only a madman could pace and rent his clothes over the accountability of God. What then to make of this man with claim that God had preserved him not once but twice out of the ruins of the earth, solely in order to raise up a witness against himself?
And in the next couple of sentences, he juxtaposes madness with narrative itself. And so to me, when we've all read, well, you and I and many of us have read the whole catalog and heard the comments, well, this is nihilist, it's Gnostic, there's a big void, and we're managing man's agency against this meaninglessness. And to me, this is the pivotal moment for McCarthy as the writer. And I'll go back and backfill this a little bit. Mm-hmm. You have madness, you have the narrative. The narrative is basically Aristotelian logic, and madness is just like, well, whatever, in the end, I don't really know. Just, have fun, do whatever. That's totally unsatisfying and unworkable, and you wouldn't really motivate nor a novel, nor a man to read a novel.
Right.
My supposition is that the wolf conversation with Arnolfo, or whatever his name is, where we talk about the Matrix and number 7. These are pretty classic magical concepts. And matriz, he even uses the Spanish, the Latinate for womb. And so,
yes.
Now, if I step another level over, and we remember last year or what happened, it kind of came to light that McCarthy, the man, had, let's say, I don't personally apply, or I don't think that what he did was amoral at all. He wants to keep his private life private. Do it.
Yeah.
This woman, whatever her name was, seems to have played a massive role in the Border trilogy. She's the horsewoman. She's probably the one who rode into Mexico. He didn't ride a horse into Mexico. When I first confronted or came into contact with McCarthy, people told me, he got on a horse, learned how to ride, learned Spanish, and then rode the entire Blood Meridian Trail horseback by himself. No, he didn't. He didn't do any of that. What he did was he laid up having a glass of wine with this, sounds like a pretty fascinating, probably sexy woman, and engaged with her in some sense. And I think that McCarthy realized that he's going to be situated in this mystery, and man's sort of counterpart is woman, and he's ascribing to her. It's in some ways it makes my appreciation for McCarthy even bigger, that he's weaving his own life, the lives of his loved ones, and what we take from this now, sitting here 2 years after his death, into this utterly meaningful, beautiful object. And he does, in a way, through this, I can only term like a magical pass, to use a sort of Castanedian term here.
And so this magical pass, do you think, sorry.
No, it's fine.
You're thinking this magical pass is the book entirely, or is it really, can we kind of condense that even further down to this bit with the ex-priest?
I think it's that moment. Yeah, exactly. It becomes, the book we have, but there is this sense that the character, our hero, is passing through something. The first few times that I read this, and I had to go back and check it, it felt to me that there was two characters, that there was like, and what it really is that he juxtaposes. See, I had to really look back, and I was like, wait a minute, did you just either, and of course McCarthy doesn't make a mistake, but there's almost a sense that, like, did the editor miss something here where one character became another? And I'm talking about this priest guy, because he's talking about someone else, and he's talking about the ex-priest. So the ex-priest is talking about the ex-priest. And if you walk this through in that moment, that's when he says, and I have to say, I know this sounds a little out there, but I've been thinking these thoughts for about 20 years, and I'm pretty sure that is that moment where madness, who is who, like, is, it's not as scary as it seems the longer you sit with this idea that we are all connected. And of course, this is theological and biblical and what have you, but it takes us back to this telepathic project that we're doing with writing. Right. We're trying to do something for each other. It's not really, it's self-aggrandizing to some extent, but I think at the core, it's a desperate attempt to get out into the world and say, are you real? Can you hold my hand?
Right.
And I'll shut up right now by saying the whole book is kind of, it's structured on the wolf's death, and then this sort of domestication into this dog thing that's this weird. In the very end of the book, it's described as kind of a weird dog. It was a hunting dog. It's kind of it's got odd movements, and Parham rejects violently this thing that he's been given, and then he breaks down in his brokenness, and he is forced to turn back out into the darkness to call for the one thing that he has. Now, I'm one more sentence, and I really will shut up. Is, to me,
no, this is awesome.
Okay, good. To me, and I do, like, in many ways, this is the whole reason why I write, and it's why I'm so happy to have this conversation, because I won't get another chance to really express this, is McCarthy is given, he's given the short shrift, or whatever the phrase is, about his humanity or his depth of his empathy or whatever. To me, that moment where I'm about to tear up right now just thinking about it. And to me, that moment is the highest achievement that it's only kind of rivaled by with Steinbeck at the end of Grapes of Wrath, where the woman is breastfeeding a bum. And again, we have this absolute brokenness, and there's nothing here but the human heart reaching out. It's like, bro, I mean, what more do you people need to understand this is not only a human being with feelings, this is something much more than that. This is a man who has passed through all of these voids and come around to sort of illustrate for us, the reader, yeah, dude, it's going to be really dark, and in the end, you better not kind of make this mistake of rejecting the warm companion that you have. Right. Anyway, I know that's kind of not as tight as I would like, but
yeah, no, I love that, and I love that kind of note you're getting to, because I totally agree with all of that, and especially this sort of criticism that McCarthy doesn't have this sort of warm, depth, compassionate thing, that it's all this nihilistic sort of violence. And you'll see some critics even say that the violence doesn't seem to serve any end or whatever. And, kind of thinking about these things, disagreeing with that note, but trying to figure out why I don't agree with it. and sort of tying it back to this section with the ex-priest, you know, I got thinking about. So I know you're familiar with this kind of opinion or conversation. There's a certain atheistic perspective that says God can't exist. What kind of God would do mean things, basically, right? It's like a child gets cancer, so there can't be God. And I sort of understand what they're saying, like, in a way. I don't agree with it because I think it's too simplistic of a perspective on reality. But it's that same kind of tenor is the thing that says that somebody like Cormac McCarthy doesn't have compassion. It's because they don't really seem to get the layering of this thing. And when we get back to the ex-priest, it's like, you know, this notion of theodicy, which is this, for people who haven't heard that term, this justifying the ways of God to man, basically, right? And there's a long literary tradition of theodicy and including elements of theodicy in work. You know, Paradise Lost is a great example. These exist basically as long as people have been writing. People have been trying to justify God to man, and sort of come back at this argument that a cruel God couldn't possibly exist or whatever. But when we get back to the ex-priest, it's this, to me, it's one of the most interesting theodicies, not in that there maybe aren't more theological sophisticated bits of writing out there that I'm not aware of, but in appeal to me personally, there's a few things in there. One is this notion that basically reality is some kind of story, or that you can really only understand it as a story, that it only sort of makes sense as a story. And in a story, there's going to be cruelty and conflict and oppression and difficulty and struggle. It's those things and the relief of those things are that which give the story its meaning, right? And so if you can understand that in a story that you're reading on the page, maybe you can begin to understand that in your own life or the life of somebody else. Now, this isn't saying that you just ignore suffering, right? And you pretend it doesn't matter. It actually means it means it matters a whole lot. Maybe it matters even more when you start to take this perspective. So there's that thing happening. Then there's also the ex-priest starts to he talks about there's the cool setup in the story the ex-priest is telling about this dome, this cathedral dome that has been affected by a terremoto. And I love the word terremoto as opposed to earthquake. It just sounds cool. But the church dome is like hanging there it doesn't make any sense from an architectural or engineering standpoint why the dome is remaining. And the sort of main character of the ex-priest's story is sort of laying under it, challenging God to drop it on him, kind of. One thing was interesting. I found out that is I think it's been brought down now, but for a while that was a real structure that was in Mexico, right? This thing actually did exist, and there's a couple photos of it that doesn't make any sense. It's like two legs of this cathedral, and the other two are just hanging in space. It's bizarre. But anyway, in all of that, the notion that God needs, and he sort of undermines this, but it's still fascinating. The notion that God needs something like a worthy adversary. And I don't know if I take that, I don't know if I believe that exactly, but it is fascinating to think of oneself not in a struggle between enemies with God, but as God, taking God as a sort of a given, and I guess sort of the narrative of your own life is one that's sort of written within the conditions that God has put upon you, right? It's sort of like, can you rise to this occasion? It's like if you have an older brother that's really wants what's best for you, but also isn't willing to give you a fucking break, you know? And I think that something like that relationship to me is more meaningful than like, well, God should just be nice all the time. It's like, I don't know that I want that exactly. Maybe in a difficult, dark period, I start to feel like I want that. But ultimately, I don't think that's what I want. I think I want to be challenged and I want there to be stakes, right? I want things to, if they don't work, they don't work. And, I want to be able to have to like grow and get scars and like, to some degree anyway. So anyway, yeah, I say all that to say, like, that passage to me is like one of the most effective sort of justifying the ways of God to man that I've really read. And there's also, and I just got one more thing to say about it. As it wraps sort of around, we get towards the end this affirmation that God doesn't need a witness. And I still don't exactly know what that means, but I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time.
Well, I'm going to try and pick up right there. I think that's the perfect place to leave it, right? With your original, how we kind of got into this very deep cavern, is the question of interiority and exteriority, which this implies some structure like a witness. And I wanted to mention as well that in one of our other talks, we touched on this objective correlative. I think that's the right word. And and to me, it's not that far from symbolism. What I thought of was symbolism when I was first taught this stuff. The dome. And in placing this conversation with the ex-priest, with this kind of, what is the higher celestial sort of structure that's maybe protecting us from this void or the whatever else is out there? And it's here again. How many people I don't even know that I noticed it until you pointed it out. Like, what an exquisite kind of environment to structure at these multiple levels of the thought, the philosophy, the cinematic visual. We've crossed the border, and I think where McCarthy, like where he makes his money or he earns his genius, is that's that passage for sure. But I think most of his stuff he has put in that thought. Like, he's not just going to pitch this kind of conversation behind a 7-Eleven with nothing else going on. And it's, in Theodicy, that's exactly what's going on. And maybe if I can try and buttress this idea that this is the pivotal moment maybe for all of McCarthy's work and all the stuff is, he seems to be stepping out away from the need as the author or as the writer to come up with an absolute answer for any of these things, as opposed to just describing them and fulfilling his role as this narrator, this story builder. And there's probably a lot of, hay to be made, examining McCarthy and his relationship to, because he clearly understands this silly kind of level of, well, I'm the writer, so I'm the god of this thing. I'm deciding. No, that's the juvenile level of the novel. You're not. We're actually exchanging among men. We're trying to offer something more than that. And I do think that he maybe some others have done it as well, or maybe a touch better. But for my money, that's the moment where all of this interiority, exterior, the brother, that was another thing that, if nothing else, the relationship between Boyd and Billy is so in this going through this again, I was just, because I have two boys now, and this is the first time I've read this book where I have an opportunity to look over and watch my oldest relate to his little brother, who's 2 years behind him. It is, I'm telling you, maybe I'm just a McCarthy, acolyte, and I can't see, but it is so beautifully, perfectly rendered that it's astonishing, frankly. The love that's there, the complication, the way it reflects to how the father talks to him, all of this psychological, familial level of the identity and the characters. He doesn't seem to ascribe a right or wrong or morality to it, but man, if it doesn't ring true as consistent throughout and coherent, but pretty damn accurate. And what was your, I don't know if you have a brother or not. I don't, but to see my little ones do this, a very similar thing was pretty moving this time through.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you went with this direction, because I was going to ask you if you have a brother. I do have an older brother, and he's about 4 years older than me, right? And so we have, there's probably some level of Billy and Boyd, and I'm probably a little more Boyd, and he's probably a little more Billy, to be honest. And, maybe that's evening out as time goes on. But I thought the brother stuff is just so, to me, I'll tear up just thinking about this. The most intense for me, and I know there's a lot of other ones, emotional part of this. So, to remind people, if it's been a while since you read it, at one point they sort of get their horses back, and then they start getting fired upon by. It's always a little bit nebulous who exactly these guys are that they're dealing with, at least to me. But anyway, they get fired upon by, I think, the people who had sort of stolen the horses or bought the horses from the people who stole them. And Boyd gets shot, and they're on the run. So Billy manages to get him on a truck, which I think is the first motor vehicle we see in the entire book, if I'm not mistaken. It sort of just shows up almost miraculously, and gets Boyd on this truck. And these Mexican folks who are on the truck take him somewhere. Billy goes and runs. He continues trying to get away from the people he's being pursued by. He ends up with just the one horse with Nino. And then eventually, a little while later, Billy figures out, he realizes where Boyd has ended up. He goes back there. He goes and he gets a doctor, and Boyd is in pretty bad shape. It's pretty serious, but this doctor manages to treat him, which is one of the most intense moments in the book, in my opinion, this treatment of him. But there's this moment, all of this I'm saying to build up, there's this moment where Billy comes in and he just says to him, after Boyd's been shot and taken care of, and he's going to survive, but it's pretty rough. And Billy says something like, "I didn't take very good care of you, did I?" And dude, I even just said, because you don't even realize how heavy the responsibility is on Billy until that moment. How much he feels this weight, and he didn't really know the stakes of the thing that they engaged in and how dangerous it really was. He thought he's doing the right thing, and it's intense. That relationship it's so well rendered, and the differences and yet the complementarity between the two of them is amazing. They're similar. They're very, very similar, but their distinctions mean everything. That little bit of static every once in a while between them is perfect. That moment where Billy owes some money, I don't know, 50 cents or something to a guard that let him pass, and he's trying to pay him back through this other border guard, and Billy has Boyd give him the money, but Billy sort of counts it again, and Boyd's like, you don't have to count. I know how to count, man. Yeah. And Billy's like, yeah, I guess he has this moment where he's like, I don't know exactly what he says, but he has this moment where he's like, yeah, I guess you do know how to count, don't you? That was kind of a dick move for me to yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is the exact moment that I've thought of too, because he, what he says is something like, he says, "I won't do it again." There's a moment where Billy has this realization. He is, to me, it shows this kind of, whatever, I guess it's a brotherly kind of love because there's some suggestion that Billy is rough or not not caring or something like that. But then when he makes that statement and he realizes,
oh, that hurt you or offended you, or minimized you in some way, and then there's a beat, and something happens. I don't know. They run down the road a little bit, and he says, "I won't do it again." And it was just like,
right.
Give me that, man, and don't give me 12 pages of she felt and he felt about. You know what I mean, dude?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm so glad that we at least got to that. Go ahead. Don't let.
Yeah. No. No. Sorry. The brother stuff. Just like a couple more notes on it because, you're sort of asking me how I relate to it, and this is interesting because the older brother and younger and I should say I have a great older brother. I didn't have an older brother who beat me up, whatever. Right. I had an older brother who took care of me, and. It's not like a parent. It's not like a father because they're not that much older than you. They're just another guy who happens to be a little bit further down the road than you. And, I don't know necessarily what it's like to be the older brother in that situation, but there's this, when we find out that Boyd is dead, it's fucking devastating for a whole bunch of reasons. One is we had that moment earlier on when Billy, this is much earlier on, when Billy's not sure what happened to him after getting shot. And he says something like, "You're all I have left," right? It's one of these few moments where Billy actually emotes. And you can see why. His brother's just off in the hinterlands with a gunshot wound somewhere, and who knows what's happening to him. And then he finally ends up losing Boyd, and it's just devastating because now what does Billy have left? He has nothing to tether him. All he has left is the horse. He's got this one horse. That's all the connection he has to even his own life, right? There's no home back home. There's no property. There's no claim to anything. And so I think, I don't know, there's just so much beautiful in that relationship. And it's incredibly well rendered. I think Cormac is, I think he has two sisters. I don't know. No, he had a brother. He had two. He had a brother. He's the oldest, I believe, and he had three. Yeah, so he knows about that. And I think he also nails the older brother, younger brother dynamic very well in the individual personality types that tend to manifest in the two, right? So the older one tends to mature a little bit faster. They are a little bit more, they take a little bit more responsibility. They're a little bit more careful and deliberate. And the younger one is a little bit wilder, is a little bit more willing to take chances, is a little bit more idealistic. And he freaking nails those two, that dynamic between those two. Yeah, it's really, really good.
To try and
it's cool to have. It's cool to have younger brothers. Let me just if they stay close throughout their whole life, that is an incredible gift for them to have. So
that's we think about this all the time. My wife and I talk about this all the time. Is that because I mean, it's no mystery how imperfect I am, and she's much better person than I, but we have to confront this and say, the gift that we gave to our oldest was the next in line, and the gift that we gave to him, and I am ridiculously blessed. We have a fourth on the way, and they're all brothers, and so I have to ponder this.
That's amazing.
What was it? You said something there that I'd like to. Oh yeah. So if nothing else, I think that I'm really happy that we got to just touch on this stunning beauty between these two brothers. If for readers that wasn't enough, when this all comes around in The Crossing, in Cities on the Plain, and Billy loses his surrogate little brother again.
Yeah.
I mean, holy shit. It has, if you know what I'm saying? And again, the dog returns at that point, and it's just, again, this is why this is if I could only have one book, I mean, this is it. It's got everything that I need.
Yeah. This makes me want to ask you a question about Billy Parham, so he goes through a sort of a Job-like experience in a way, right? Just like, it's not good. Very little good happens to him in the course of this book. I guess it's sort of a two-parter or two aspects on the same question. How responsible do you think Billy is for that? All these things happening to him? And then how responsible do you think Cormac McCarthy is implying that he is? I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. It's the absolute best question to follow up on the whole business of the theodicy, because implied in this brother business is the biblical idea of like my brother's keeper. I mean, There's nothing more fundamentally, the biggest human question to me anyway, is that. It's not whether or not we can make AI or solve any of this other shit. It has been, and it'll probably continue to be, does this person actually matter to me, and how can I facilitate that? And if that's all we have, it might be all we have. It's probably enough. But in terms of this issue, this particular way of framing it, I think that what I take from it is that he's in the narrative, and to the extent that he can, Billy, or any of us maybe, find his place in that narrative as just not just some component, but another component. Maybe McCarthy is answering in some way with the Border Trilogy as a whole, the questions raised in Blood Meridian about this very thing, like how responsible, how much agency do I have? And I'm not sure where I could come down about McCarthy exactly. But yeah, if we take Billy, who I think I've said before, he's probably my all-time favorite character in all fiction, Billy. It's just, as the girls say these days, that's everything. Like, Billy's everything to me. I was struck again in this reading, like, there are some moments of true badassery on both parts, Boyd and Billy, where you read back and they're like, fucking A, that was straight out of an action movie. And that's shit that cowboys could have done. Like, he's like 17 years old and just manned the fuck up in a way that you're like, damn. Like, not only is this a fully developed dude, like anyway.
Right.
So
you believe it too. You believe it. It doesn't seem artificial. It's like, yeah, man, that's
absolutely. Yeah, it's just exquisite shit. That's such a great question, Brad. I mean, how that's the struggle, right? Like, here we are, we have this little smidgen of time. We are conditioned when we come in, whether nature, nurture, and all of that. And then we're going to exit. And that narrative frame exists, like Castaneda and many others have framed it. The day you're born is also in some sense the day you die. It's all kind of out there. It's going to happen. And, we play games with that. We resist it. But man, I'm not really sure that I know. I don't think that he's in any way bad. Like, I don't think that Billy is at all. So that's why I think that I brought back to the theodicy thing. It's so perfect. Yeah, you're flawed, but you're not. Mm-hmm. It is not that he doesn't try. It's not that he doesn't have heart. It's not that he does. He's obviously a badass. He's very intelligent, incredibly capable. I mean, he's 17 years old and he's trapping this wolf. He gets like a 2-week lesson. Pulls it off, takes the thing back across, to its home. He has this incredible moral center. And that moral center is it's almost as if the more that he tries to live, the more the world is just beating the living Christ out of him.
Yes.
And right up to the end. So maybe to answer that question beyond just, my fooling around with it, you have to go to Cities on the Plain, under the overpass with the dude, is this death? There's that question. in the third book, he meets this guy. Billy is an old man, and he meets what he thinks might be his death, walking down the road. And then they sit down and have this very long conversation about realms and ceremonies and rituals and all of these efforts that we can do or attempt to do. And you know, the love, you know, Boyd is implied in every sentence of that, and is John Grady Cole at that point. So,
right,
man, that may be the heart of it, Brad. You know, like how responsible are we?
Well, no, I mean, no, this is a great answer. And I put that to you, not expecting you to be like, you know, knowing that that's knowing that that's a difficult question in this book and in life. I mean, because you look at the things that Billy does that you could say are mistakes, and they're all mistakes of the heart, right? Like, it's easy to say, well, you should have never taken the she-wolf back down to Mexico. Yeah, he probably shouldn't have, right? But there is definitely a way of framing up what's the compassionate, right, ethical thing to do, and that he should have done that, right? And so he didn't make a mistake out of any of the 7 deadly sins, right? He made a mistake because he let the right thing get bigger than the smart thing. It's really, and I don't know, I guess I think about that in terms of, and it's what, you know, this is what great literature does, I suppose, is it makes you sort of reflect back on your own life and ask yourself questions about responsibility. Because, you know, generally, not that I always do this, but I try to think of, you know, I try to take as much responsibility as I can handle, right? And yet I also am, the other side of my brain is sort of aware that, like, I'm not actually in control of anything. It all just happens in a way. And it's like something about trying to hold those two things in mind at the same time is difficult to do. And I kind of can't give up either one of them, right? If I accept that everything that happens to me is like negative is my fault, it crushes you. And if you don't take responsibility for anything, then, you know, everything falls apart, I guess. So I don't know. As I realized that, like, that's one of the kind of core, I don't know, themes almost seems like a cheap word to apply to this book, but that seems to be like one of the core sort of things, coins in this, that's flipping through this book. And when you look at the two sides of it, they have slightly different meanings. I have a couple other places that I want to go. One is something I sort of teased in my introduction. And this book is called The Crossing, and yet there are 3 crossings. They crossed in that deep twilight a broad volcanic plain bounded within the rim of hills. The hills were a deep blue in the blue dusk, and the round feet of the pony clopped flatly on the gravel of the desert floor. The night was falling down from the east, and the darkness that passed over them came in a sudden breath of cold and stillness and passed on, as if the darkness had a soul itself that was the sun's assassin hurrying to the west, as once men did believe, as they may believe again. They rode up off the plain in the final dying light, man and wolf and horse, over a terrace land of low hills much eroded by the wind, and they crossed through a fence line, or crossed where a fence line once had been, the wires long down and rolled and carried off, and the little naked mesquite posts wandering single file away into the night like an enfilade of bent and twisted pensioners. They rode through the pass in the dark, and there he sat the horse and watched lightning to the south far over the plains of Mexico. The wind was thrashing softly through the trees in the pass, and in the wind were spits of sleet. He made his camp in the lee of an arroyo south of the pass, and gathered wood and made a fire and gave the wolf all the water she would drink. Then he tied her to the washed-out elbow of a cottonwood and walked back and unsaddled and hobbled the horse. He unrolled the blanket and threw it over his shoulder and took the moquila and went and sat before the fire. The wolf sat on her haunches below him in the draw and watched him with her intractable eyes so red in the firelight. From time to time she would bend to try the bindings on her leg with her side teeth, but she could not grip them for the stick in her jaws. What do you make of that? What does the title mean? I mean, I guess one, being aware that you've sort of suggested to us, and I think made a very convincing case, that the conversation that Billy has with the ex-priest, or rather the ex-priest's story, is itself a kind of crossing, not just in this book, but perhaps in Cormac McCarthy's overall work, and for all we know, his sort of spiritual life. But what should we make of the fact that this book is called The Crossing and there's multiple crossings? Is there something more to that, or is it just The Crossing is a better title than The Crossings?
I think it's that last thing. It's an artistic choice that this is, but this is maybe, back to his McCarthy's consistent ability to like overlay coherence in the work itself, which again, coming out of like maybe the emotional part of our conversation today, that stuff is incredibly messy and incredibly, like at the end of our lives, we'll probably not be a hell of a lot farther down the road than we are right now, wrestling with these questions.
Right.
And so I have to turn at some point, and every man, I guess, does, like, all right, well, what's the best I can do with this? And, McCarthy, par excellence, I mean, the best there ever was, maybe, at managing all of these elements and then making beautiful choices with them. And so it may very well just be that The Crossing sounds better as a title. I think it does. Do you? I think it does.
It does. I think it does. Yeah. The Crossings is kind of weird. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about this last week, this question, and that's where I kind of got back to, okay, so at the beginning we have this, people, you hear this, I think, in like Lit 101 in college, if you read this book or whenever you read it. Well, the Border Trilogy is really about like the fencing in of wild man. And it's this point, and it is. And, maybe we can talk about the bomb. This, I think, is it 1946 that this kind of winds out? That's somewhere in that area.
44 maybe, but yeah, okay. Yeah, in that time period, yeah.
So right around that era, and I'm not a history guy, but I do know enough to say that that particular little window of time, and then of course we know McCarthy goes on to, and probably at this point of writing this, had a fascination with physics and all these other questions of, Oppenheimer shows up later. And so there's probably something to this academic reading where a big piece of the superstructure here does have to do with some type of a crossing away from what's the word I'm looking for is really a narrative term, the jumping off point. You'll hear this sometimes with screenwriters, and it actually comes earlier, like in the first act of a work, but whatever, it's still, you could say, is sort of well placed in that if we pinpoint it at that moment of, okay, the first crossing, technically Billy has gone into Mexico, has already occurred. And then we have this, has he returned? Yeah, he's coming back, right? When he runs into this priest. I'm not exactly sure.
I believe it's after he's killed the wolf, killed the wolf, and he's on his way back in his first jaunt into Mexico. It's on the return part of it, but he's still in Mexico. Yeah,
I think part of that structure is related to that. So he goes down with the live wolf. He comes back to a dead family, takes the only meaningful thing in his life, Boyd, to cross again. And of course, Boyd ends up staying down there too. In the end, he has these bones. He has like this.
Yeah.
This symbol, but it's more than a symbol. It is in some way Boyd, and it is in some way, he gets the lifeless body of the wolf at one point too. So I think there's a big implication here about something was sacrificed in our technological progress towards civilization. And here again, McCarthy doesn't seem to be making absolute sort of right and wrong statements like, where did you guys fuck this up? On the other hand, he's just kind of saying, hey guys, we might have fucked this up a little bit. Either way, it's there are profound consequences to what we're engaged in. What do you think of that kind of academic basic reading?
Yeah, I mean, I think McCarthy is definitely operating on that level. I think that's true. I mean, I think there's also, I think it's hard to deny, especially with him putting the atom bomb at the end, because that feels like it's a sort of, it's weird because I think there's a way of looking at Blood Meridian as actually being the prequel to the Border trilogy. Like, and I know that's a little bit like sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe thinking, but you do have to remember that the Blood Meridian ends with like fences being sort of mechanically installed and the sort of the border being established. And then the next set of books is the Border trilogy, right? And the crossing is the crossing of them. So I don't think it's a far-fetched to say that like the Blood Meridian is sort of at least in the DNA of this trilogy. And so there is something about this fencing in, not of just the territory, but of the people, and of man and of freedom, right? The fact that that this border, it's interesting now, the sort of border issues that we're having, are different than the border issues that are sort of existent in the Border trilogy, but not necessarily the opposite. So I definitely think there's some truth to this, but I think there's also something somewhat more metaphysical going on about this notion of borders and crossings, and McCarthy is using an actual physical border in the real world as the sort of physical stand-in for it. And I have a few ways of thinking about that. I mean, one is, you'll note that I think every time that Billy crosses the border, right before he does it, he violates a sort of a rule or a stricture. Like, he was supposed to kill the wolf. That's what he was supposed to do. And he didn't. He took the wolf over. And then when he goes back with Boyd, right before they do it, Boyd is staying with this family, and they steal everything they can from this family. Now, I don't think that necessarily makes Billy a bad person, but that's totally out of character for him. That's violating a rule. Nobody, even himself wouldn't say that was a good thing to do. But they needed some money, and they needed a gun, and whatever else they took, right? There's something else, I think, in the third time he crosses, too, that's a little odd. I'm blanking on what it is right now, but I feel like he crossed an ethical line or something there, too. So my point of this is that these crossings are suggestive of some kind of crossing sort of within himself. But then there's also this representation that, like, Mexico and America being, I think one simple, oversimple, and kind of stupid reading of this book would be to point out that Cormac McCarthy doesn't seem to think much of Mexico. It would be this like quasi-racist perspective on how, Cormac McCarthy feels about Mexico. I mean, I think he's holding these two things as these sort of separate worlds in which one is like order, perhaps to an extreme extent, and the other is chaos, perhaps to an extreme extent, right? And the border is sort of serving to kind of contain them from each other. But then the problem is, like, if you think about, there's a whole, maybe I'll do this in the Madness episode. I'll go into, have you ever read Reza Negarestani's Cyclonopedia? Are you familiar with this at all?
No.
he has this whole it's fascinating, and it doesn't make any sense in some ways, but it's also parts of it are brilliant, and I'm just not smart enough to really understand it. He has this whole concept of holes, and I don't totally understand it, but one aspect of it is like there's everything conceptually and narratively is made up of either solid or void, right? And you can think about what these two things mean in a bunch of different ways, but the important thing is that they're in opposition to each other. And so a whole could be a circumscribed space of chaos, or it could be a circumscribed space of order. And I think the important thing, as I'm trying to think about this in terms of the crossing, is like sometimes creating a whole, creating an isolation is good. Like if you isolate a tumor, right? And that kind of cuts it off. It doesn't infect the rest of the tissue. But then sometimes if you create a border around something, you make something, circumscribe something, all you do is increase the pressure in that space until it sort of explodes rather than sort of letting it distribute. And I think there's something going on here, and I don't know if I can even put that fine of a point on it. I think there's something going on here where Cormac is not only saying that the fences, the sort of, and I don't want to get geopolitical about this, I think it's on a more metaphysical level, that by hemming in, say, freedom, for instance, and with order, you start to contaminate it somehow. It starts to get ossified. But then also there's something about like isolating and circumscribing chaos that makes it more dangerous and violent too. It's like it allows it to pressurize and bring stuff spurting out onto the surface. And so there's something about this border. It's like it actually, we contained two different kinds of things and had two different kinds of negative effects somehow. And the interplay of these two things is like, it does seem to be significant to like North American history at this point, right? It's like we push a bunch of our problems south and we think it's all contained and it just boils over, right? I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot to, I think there's yeah.
I was just going to say, I really like that, actually. I don't know if you just pulled that out of nowhere, and I have maybe heard a little bit about this holes and parts thing, but I think you're really onto something there, but applying this in a metaphysical sense as opposed to geopolitical or even legal. Legal is another thing that McCarthy's always playing around with legal, with the judge and all that stuff.
Yes, that's true.
And let's just say, I mean, no doubt whether or not these are the exact ideas McCarthy's playing with or not, undeniably it's metaphysical. Undeniably that's what's and there's something related. I had it kind of contained to wildness in general. Like we build the fence to contain wildness, but permaculture would tell us actually, when you just make this monocrop, dude, you make your crop weaker, and you miss out on all this other goodness, the little spices and bits that actually infuse value into this. So the dog at the end, not only is the dog kind of like, well, it was a half sort of hunting dog that was left in the mountains, and it's sort of there's a mutant language to it, but he rejects it. So we've pushed away the wildness, or like you say, it's almost as if, I mean, maybe we are going to end up with something like The Running Man, where we need this just absolute wild, bloodthirsty thing, and we just haven't found the balance
yet. As a pressure valve.
Yes.
As like a pressure valve. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't like to think that, but it is being realistic. I like this notion of the permaculture. That's a really good way to put it, because we do have a tendency in American culture. We have a bunch of different tendencies that are often contradictory, but one of them is we tend to over organize and over order things, and sort of thereby sort of blanch the humanity out of them, right? So yeah, we're I think about this like all the time in terms of American history. It's like we like when the Europeans came here, one of the things they found was tobacco, right? And I don't know how much tobacco the natives were smoking exactly, but it definitely had like a ceremonial, spiritual, religious aspect to it, right? And we turned it into a product that you're supposed to consume. Like we made it a product you can buy in every corner that kills you, that you use constantly. That's what we turned it into, right?
Yeah.
and America and the colonists came here and they were growing. There was a lot of corn being grown, right? Because it's a very useful crop. It's very hardy. You can do a lot of things with it. And then we turned it into like poison syrup. Right? It's just like we tend to do this thing where we push it too far, right? We put we put an exponent on it, so it's multiplied by itself, and it becomes this thing that it never ought to have been in a way, and like that's like order kind of out of control, and that seems to me to be part of like the American problem. Not the only. There's a lot of other stuff going on too, but that's one thing that as I've gotten older is yeah.
Do you think that that's also sort of mirrored in this relationship with Billy and Boyd, insofar as the first brother kind of has to forge this thing? He gets his ass whooped, because the one aspect of the younger brother I've noticed is oftentimes the younger brother comes up with these. He's a little bit maybe wilder, but he's also more creative and more or intuitive or a little bit freer. Mm-hmm. Just an idea. I don't know. It just occurred to me right now.
I think there really is something to that. And then that's interesting too, because who really, in the end, I mean, the story of Boyd is terrible, but in the end, who really belongs in Mexico between Billy and Boyd? It seems Boyd is the one who belongs in Mexico somehow. It somehow makes sense. And Quijada tells us, or however you say his name, he tells us that at the end. It's like it's sort of fated that Boyd is down here. This is what was meant to happen. And there's also the one of the parts of this book that I find, I mean, I love so many things about it, but this idea of the corridos that they're singing, or however you say it. Yeah. And there's this corrido about Boyd, because Billy and Boyd become these legends, and Boyd even more so, right?
Yeah.
And it's partially based on a story that's not true, right? It's an exaggeration, right? And the guy that he's a hero for killing fell off his own horse, right? But after a long time, he stirred. He leaned forward. He turned the white porcelain bowl up and held it in the palm of his hand and regarded it. "The world has no name," he said. "The names of the Cerros and the Sierras and the deserts exist only on maps. We name them that we do not lose our way. Yet it was because the way was lost to us already that we have made those names. The world cannot be lost. We are the ones. And it is because these names and these coordinates are our own naming that they cannot save us, that they cannot find for us the way again. Your brother is in that place which the world has chosen for him. He is where he is supposed to be, and yet the place he has found is also of his own choosing. That is a piece of luck not to be despised." Yeah, but Boyd apparently just slots right into this corrido that already exists. It's already there. It's a song that's about him, but it's also older than he is. And so there is this way that Boyd is whatever. I almost said Boyd is Mexican. That's not really what it is. Whatever metaphysical thing Cormac McCarthy's trying to do, Boyd is the Mexican and Billy is the American. Yeah, I think that's true.
Damn, dude, I think you might have actually just chipped away a new bit of this thing, because remember later in No Country for Old Men, there's that question of the sheriff asks him, well, that is a question. Does he cease being Mexican when he's dead? He's asking this to the deputy.
That's right.
Remember that line?
Yeah.
With the Mexico thing, yeah, it preoccupies this bulk of McCarthy's, because absolutely Blood Meridian is this precursor, at least, if not a prequel to the Border Trilogy.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah,
I think you might have just chipped away another piece there.
Well, no, I think we did it together because you were I was rambling about Mexico and America. No, that's really interesting. It is helping me sort of see this in a different light.
Me too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hadn't really thought about it that way.
No. This is what's cool about doing these conversations. I want to take this in one more direction, and we touched on it a little bit, and I think this will be kind of our last general topic area, and this has been so much fun for sure. The atom bomb. We've talked about it a little bit, but I want to dig into it a little bit more for a couple of reasons, because you and I, for people who don't podcast, you might be surprised to find out that these conversations often have some back channel elements to them, right? and I mentioned to you, let's maybe talk about the atom bomb stuff, and you mentioned Twin Peaks: The Return, which is exactly where my head was going as well. But we also should, keep in mind too that McCarthy, in his last two books, The Passenger and Stella Maris, the atom bomb features in there very prominently. And in fact, there's an incredible passage describing, I believe it's the Trinity test, that to my mind, I know that Chris Nolan, with conventional special effects, recreated the Trinity explosion. I think McCarthy did it better on the page. But I guess I've been thinking about, this is something that preoccupies my mind. And in fact, when I had David Leo Rice on the show a couple months ago now, in his book, The Squimbop Condition, there is a sort of in a way that only David Leo Rice can do, there is a sort of reimagining of nuclear war. And it got me thinking, if the 20th century is a tale, as according to The Crossing, all of this is just a tale, tales within tales, right? What is the literary device of the atom bomb? The hell is that thing? Because it seems like the one special effect we have, like maybe the internet is a later on special effect in the 20th century tale, but certainly. And it's so jarring. Honestly, the first time I read The Crossing, I didn't even realize that was the atom bomb. I just read right through it. It took me this more recent reading to actually catch it. But yeah, I guess it's kind of an open-ended question, and then maybe we can relate it to the book. But what do you think? Maybe this is a good question. How would you explain, if this comes up, how would you explain what the atom bomb is to your kids even?
My answer maybe I can answer both, versions of the question. Like, what does this mean for the narrative, and then what is it to our kids? And I could be just making this up, but what I tend to go with is, so in Twin Peaks, episode 18 of season 3, The Return, Lynch seems to imply that there's at least a piercing between a veil or worlds of some sort, and this entity sneaks through. Seems as plausible as anything else to me. I think that for McCarthy, it implies annihilation. Maybe at like a root, fundamental, atomic, ultimately the story is going to bring this into fruition sort of level. Like you're born, you die, you made the bomb, you annihilated yourselves. But on where because I have kids, I can't be like, hey, enjoy it until it's over. You're good. I have to find this meaning. And for me, the meaning is that, okay, maybe these worlds were mingled. Maybe they were always mingled, though, in some way, and we made manifest in the external world a thing that was already. There's this line, I think we talked about this as well. Maybe you will have it in mind better than me, but it was something about like the world is actually contained in man's hearts. The world is not out there. The world, you think it is, and you think your heart is in here, but that thing out there is contained in your heart. And this is this, we may have talked about this before too, this panentheistic worldview where, not to be confused with pantheism, where pantheism is like God's in the rock, you know, that rock is the God. Let's worship the rock. That seems, I guess, primitive, but panentheism is this I think more sophisticated and nuanced idea where we're in God. God is in us. This is all God. Another way of saying this is like the mind of God. But God is in all things, but also in the thought that he's in all things. And it's this, that's that madness. That's that like, oh, so what am I even talking about? Well, I think McCarthy's kind of onto something. You're in a story because the narrative is this forced linear experience is also part of God. And so what does this have to do with the bomb? Well, if we've made manifest something that was within, it's probably incumbent upon us, or it's our responsibility to yoke that thing and leash it. And, you know, if it were me, the way I would solve this is I would go back to man versus man, one-on-one duels to solve all conflict. I would use nuclear power,
Sure.
you know, for our energy. And I would just,
Right.
you can't use the bombs. Like, we're going to just get rid of those somehow. I don't know that we could. Maybe we need to duke it out all the time. Like, there needs to be just constant blood matches in some ordered fashion to manage this. I kind of really believe this.
I
too.
mean, honestly, the body count would be lower, and it would be more fair, probably, whatever fairness means.
Yeah. And there's a book, this may be of interest to some people, called Camp 38. It's a little tiny, I guess it's a novel by Jill Van Conen. And in this world, it's kind of an isolated world in the Pacific Northwest where these people architect a way to financially support a sort of separate society within the woods up here. And the way that they manage conflict is exactly that. You get one knife, you get some cordage, and you go into a sort of natural space. So you can't use guns. It requires physical and mental and strategic. But what it really requires, the way that it forms society, is that you can't build up gangs. You have to deal with your conflicts.
Right.
And anybody can call you out. So you're forced to not just be polite, but to be smart about how you manage not just this interaction, but the whole of your responsibilities in life. I don't know if that will be helpful for anybody, but yeah, what do you think? Do you tend towards this that the Lynchian idea?
Yeah, I do. See, I ended up. So I've got this book coming out pretty soon, and in sort of, I have this notion, and it's weird to even say because I don't necessarily think it's true, but I think it's sort of like metaphorically true, and I don't have or narratively true, and I don't have like a better way to explain it. I do think there is something to this notion that William S. Burroughs says, that there's something old and evil in North America, or perhaps the whole Western Hemisphere, and it was sort of here waiting, and it's not. And, you know, this gets jokified into a meme that like, oh, America's possessed by a corn demon. Like, that's one way of saying it, but I think there's a bunch of different ways of looking at it. That there is, and again, I don't necessarily believe this is actually true, but it seems to be narratively and metaphorically true. That there is something different about the Western Hemisphere, and kind of dark, or it has dark implications or dark possibilities. And I do think there's this strange way in which the atom bomb like opened the door to it somehow and sort of let something in. And it might not even be that it's just the bomb itself. It may be all of the intellectual and financial resources that had to be put into contact with each other to make it happen. Because there's a lot of in those sort of build up to the bomb happening, there's a lot of like, we like elevated the intellectual rational enterprise to like an industrial scale, right? We leveraged it in like a different way. And you know, that led to things like, I suppose there's probably a straight line between the Manhattan Project and NASA, I'm sure. Like, I bet there's a lot of the same people and entities involved in both of those things. And, you know, people can agree or disagree on the value of those things. But yeah, it's like something we sort of unlocked some like hyper, like the way that I think about it in my head is the atom bomb opened a door to a hyper rational demon that we're now contending with without knowing it. But I say that not thinking that that's actually true, but that's just the easiest way for me to describe what happened, right? Taking a whole bunch of complicated things and sort of packaging it into a few sentences.
Yeah.
And I think Cormac McCarthy, maybe not so much in The Crossing, but in The Passenger, I think he sort of thinks that's true as well. Something all along those lines anyway, if he perhaps he would say it very differently. It's such a powerful choice to put this at the end of this book, because the juxtaposition between what we've seen, which is fundamentally a book that could have taken place any time between 1800 and 1950, right? In terms of technology, you know, you'd have to switch out a couple things if you were going to make it older, but fundamentally, narratively, it could have happened any time since. Honestly, practically any time since Europeans landed on North America, really, it could have happened. And then at the end, you're going to put this one of the most insane technological achievements / events ever at the end of it is kind of an insane thing to do. It's jarring almost, but I think that jarringness, that juxtaposition that's like almost startling, is also kind of what the 20th century is like itself, right? Like the 20th century was like the atom bomb of human history in a way, right? It's like everything's going to change right now, right? And so, it's fascinating. It's a power move. I can imagine how excited Cormac McCarthy got when he realized he was going to put the bomb in there.
He probably just sat back.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah,
because I know you know this feeling. I've had a couple good creative ideas in my time. I will say a couple. And when those good you get those good ones and you know they're good, it's like, holy shit. It's exciting. Even if you don't take credit for it, it's still like you gets your blood pumping. You want to run around a little bit. And I can imagine he got very excited when he was like, I'm gonna blow the bomb up at the end of this. Maybe he knew the whole time. I don't know. He's a genius, so he might have known the whole time. But anyway,
hard to say.
Gosh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of wrap this up, I suppose. I mean, we're kind of at the 2-hour mark, and I like to keep it around that territory. I mean, this has been awesome. I feel like I'm learning more about this book as I go. I feel like it's something still sort of gestating, even though, I mean, I pretty much read it almost twice just in the last little while here in the lead up to this conversation. I've been thinking about it a lot. Is there anything we kind of left on the table that, you know, you feel like you want to say about this book that we didn't really get to?
No, you know, I'll just be honest with the audience. I mean, when we got to, you know, this bit about the ex-priest, which is sort of my contribution to the McCarthy theories, I didn't feel I strongly put it forward. But then as I listened to your kind of reply to that, I realized you had just back-built it for me almost. So I really, if you hadn't done that, I'd probably feel, all right, can we go back to this so I can make my case better? But no, you made the rest of the case. So thanks, Brad.
Oh yeah, man. No, this has been great. I mean, you and I we've had, I don't know, I guess 4 conversations now in public, and I always find them so fruitful and interesting. And so I'm really glad to do them. And I mean, before we close it out, I do want to stress to people, buy King of Dogs, buy Crowbar. Crowbar is one of the best books I've ever read, like full stop. I mean, I know I have a lot of people on here, and I don't have people on here if I don't like their work, and I recommend everybody's. But Crowbar is, if I didn't know you and Crowbar came across my desk, I would be feverishly trying to get a hold of you. So, people go out and buy that, and follow. There'll be links obviously to where you can find the great Andrew Edwards. And other than that, I think that's all we've got. Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I feel the same way. You just cracked open like another set of layers for a book that I literally have read this 10 times. And it played a big role.
You've read it 10.
Oh yeah. I've listened to it probably 10 times, and I've gone through the text, actually reading it at least 10 times. So that's to your credit that this conversation just actually opened up a whole, and McCarthy's of course, but no, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. Well, see you on the next one.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his bad. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had. He went down to the dope shop one Saturday night. He knew the lights would all be burning bright. Well, I guess he smoked a dozen pills or more. When he woke up, he was on a foreign shore. Queen of Sheba was the first he met. She called him lovey-dovey and honey pet. She gave him a great big automobile with a diamond headlight and a golden wheel. Down in Honolulu, Willie fell in a trance, seeing the dusky beauties do the hula dance. His sweetie got in jail and Willie sure did shout when he got the news that she had wiggled out. He landed with a splash in the river Nile, riding on a sea-going crocodile. He winked at Cleopatra, she said, ain't he a sight? He said, how about a date for next Saturday night? He had 1,000,000 cattle and he had 1,000,000 sheep, had 1,000,000 vessels on the ocean deep, had $1,000,000 all in nickels and dimes. Well, he knew because he counted it 1,000 times. He landed in New York one evening late. He asked his sugar for an after date, started to kiss her and she started to pout when bang, bang, and the door gave